After all this, you still...
I still want that gas, yes. And you had better deliver.
Smoking on that pack that killed Elon. Or is it Elon? I can't forget how to say it.
Elon.
Elon, okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm going off of the Japanese pronunciation. How good.
Watch out, you get banned from Twitter. Yeah,
if we get too close to spelled differently. Okay.
Oh, I was telling Josh about that too, because Josh was like, I haven't seen Kennedy on the timeline. What happened? And it's like, ooh.
I'm banned.
Man, and what you did sounded even more mild than what Adi did. But I guess it was commenting on your post. That was a different one, but I think that was it, wasn't it? Or was it someone else's post?
No, it was someone else's post entirely that
okay.
got me timed out. I deleted that account anyways.
I'm perma'd, so
dang.
Or at least they have not given me any indication of when I might be unbanned.
I think all the people who had good posts are starting to get kicked off the site slowly, and that should tell
or
you
just leave.
Or
also,
just leave.
I think it's that you mentioned Bluesky to an extent, because somebody posted that they were they posted on Twitter, "Hey, I've got a Bluesky code. I'm over there more now." And when they came back, their account was locked, and that post that Twitter made them delete it.
Oh. And there was that whole petty period of preventing people from having their Mastodon links and stuff like that too. So I'm sure he just woke up bitter one day and said, "We need to do something about this.
We gotta do something about this, Kennedy-Cooper. They're accumulating too much power."
Just as Char prophesized that new types need to leave Earth, all good posters have to leave Twitter.
Indeed.
Yeah, that's the only way that you can attain universal empathy and understanding.
Is to leave the place where you just constantly put your stream of thought in the most repugnant ways possible.
Yeah, exactly. You gotta leave that place, and then you'll be like, "Oh yeah, other people do exist."
Instead of heading to space, we're just touching grass.
Yeah.
Well, welcome back to the greenhouse, dear listeners. As you can tell by the title, we're back finally with another Gundam episode. If the show's about anything, it's about Gundam. Joining me today is co-host Josh and friend of the show, kennedytcooper.
So glad to be here.
Yeah, always a great time.
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad to be riding the wave where I want to be recording again. It's been good. And it's again, I did not expect last year to have to be blessed with a new Gundam series the way we got, but they put in something on Mercury on that witch. That witch from Mercury was it came as soon as it went. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a shorter one.
Yeah,
but I mean, it was a good time, I think, and we'll look forward to delving into all that.
Also,
sure.
I think given its popularity, I mean, even Seed is getting a new movie 18 years later.
Yeah.
I doubt that we've seen the last of Ad Astra, right?
Yeah, though I was thinking, because I watched that trailer recently, and I wasn't a huge fan of the Seed art style, but I was like, man, they made the characters look really ugly in this movie, especially the women.
I did feel like the style of the movie trailer was a little. I
saw the twinks come back. I was happy. That's what.
Yeah, I was that. I mean, the guys, they look the same, but the girls all have these weird, their lips all look really weird. It was like they took the criticism that every character looked the same. Well, let's let's really differentiate the women by the most stereotypical way possible.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's also odd. That it's that 2004 style. It wasn't just Gundam that was dealing with it.
100%.
A lot of series had that art style.
Yeah, it's very endemic of that era. And it's just I think it's jarring just because it's You didn't think to update this a little more for the movie, maybe?
Right?
Like to just maybe revisit some of those art style choices that you made in 2003.
Hey, this series is 20 years old, and it's gonna feel just like it's 20 years old.
I mean, I'm still kind of pumped for the movie. Don't get me wrong, but it's
Me
just
too.
like I hope that they're willing to play with it a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah, because like in
I'll enjoy it either
UC,
way. It's gonna be like at least a 5.
in
out of
UC, and even like in this like timeline, they kind of like appreciate the diversity of like human form, and I'm not saying that in like a representational kind of way, but just like every character looks distinct in like very realistic ways. And then in this like style of art, like the flatness of how human characters are drawn is weird. Especially when like the mech designs in Seed are like pretty sick. And even like other mech like series like around the same time frame, like Transformers Armada I think came out around the same time.
Yeah, there
And
was.
those designs are sick.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think, what were the big series around that? I think like Full Metal
Macross was out
Panic.
there too.
Macross is kind of like, it's sort of. People used to call it like the rival to Gundam, but I don't think that's like totally fair because it's kind of like it has almost no relevancy in the West. At least, in the year 2023.
I gotta be honest. I always try to watch Macross, and I don't know, something about that is hard for me to get into.
Oh, fair enough. Maybe that's why it is not as relevant as, Gundam or anything else.
Oh, you know what else was big around that time?
What?
Zoids.
Oh, Zoids was out that time
Oh,
too.
yeah.
Zoids also kind of had that problem where the characters looked kind of like a little flat and the robots looked crazy good.
Well, and I think probably the best way to highlight this, like, I watched a ton of Zoids when I was a kid, and I cannot tell you what a single human character looked like off the top of my head. I'm like, I think one of them, like the protagonist, was like, he was blonde and had spiky hair.
Yeah, there's definitely a blonde, spiky hair guy around the center of the story.
That's just luck of the draw.
I'm sure of that.
I'm like, that's about all I can tell you. Can't tell you about any of the other ones, but I was like, there was one where that was a character.
There's definitely a lady.
Yeah, there was a chick. I think I think she was a love interest. Probably. You cooties and whatnot. But yeah.
But yeah, no, go back and look at Zoids. That's a perfect example of just like the human characters are just meh, and the robots are just awesome.
Yeah.
I pulled it up, and it's just like, yeah, like it's.
I mean, that's colorful.
They had the decency of making them look at least a little bit like there's like lanky and fat dudes. So like, okay, I can tell them apart somewhat. But then this one again, it's kind of flat.
Yeah, I think the one you were looking at before was a newer one too.
Probably
kind of has that like newer flair to it.
Okay. So for everyone who's not familiar with Gundam, it's a series about gay people who are good at driving.
Yeah.
Well, at least one gay person that's good at driving.
No, they're all gay.
Much.
For sure, one in this series. For sure, one in this series.
The other one, not so much, but she tries.
I think some of these other characters are not straight.
Oh, I mean, that's also pretty possible.
There's a little bending going on for sure.
I kept thinking Guel would hook up with a man, maybe.
There's only so many men to go around in the show. I think odds are that like most of the girls would, have to start dating each other. Just
I feel
sheer
like,
numbers.
I feel like all the guys in Earth House for sure.
I feel like Guel had some steamy moments with some of the other male characters.
The only moments I can remember of him having any other male characters was his brother.
Well, not him.
Well, who's
I can't think of anyone else that has Stevie
who's the
moment.
blonde dude with long hair? I
Oh,
forgot to read
Shaddy.
Gundam.
I guess
Shaddy,
yeah, that was.
I kept thinking those two are gonna kiss, right?
I don't know. That seemed to be like pretty genuine animosity.
I don't know.
I mean, I know,
Like,
that's kind
I
of.
mean, past a certain point, yeah, because it's like it, after it escalated past a certain point, yeah. But some of their earlier, like petty fighting, where they would like meet in the woods and have like a little spat and like grab each other's wrists or something. I was like, what's going on here?
What's
when
up?
he's inviting
going on
Ghoul into his house, like, I mean, come on, I mean, that can only go one way, right?
Yeah. So we know for sure that some of the characters were definitely gay. I'm just saying that I think that there's room to speculate about some of the others. And Guel also, I mean, I don't know if I want to get into this yet, but let's just say Guel doesn't seem that invested in dating a woman, right? Like, just objectively throughout the course of this show, from what we see of him.
Well,
I'm just saying.
The woman he wants to date doesn't really want to date him, and he accepts that. He's not an incel, but he also doesn't exactly move on romantically, so.
I think we can also understand this to be a
He also
reverse.
doesn't actually seem romantic with her. Like, it's always just like a businessy thing.
No, not Miriam. With Suletta.
Oh, but even that, I mean, that's. I think
he kills his own father, over his desire to at least attempt to date her.
I think he's just confused.
Fellas, doesn't it happen? You ever kill your father trying
to kill your father to come out of the closet? It's more common than you think.
There's a real Freudian thing there, isn't there? I'm
on to something.
I was gonna steal your joke and be like, if you think about it, it's actually a reverse harem anime around Mirina.
Well, more so around Suletta, right? Because she's the one who actually has people.
Yeah, everybody do. It really is a reverse harem anime surrounding Suletta. In a lot of ways.
That works too.
Miriam's just the object, right? She's just like the status symbol.
Yeah.
We will get into the gay themes later because we will get derailed now. I have another thing on the outline that might derail us. Let me pull it up in the main screen. Or wait, no, you
it's right? There.
Okay, it's there. Perfect. Okay.
You know who else was gay and good at driving?
Are we talking Fast and Furious? Let's do it. A
little fella, a tiny man. I like to call Dominic Toretto.
Oh no! Go on.
So okay, I got this theory. So I should actually back up because Adi, I have a complex headcanon for Witch of Mercury that I haven't even explained all of, because I've told you about Fast and Furious a little bit, which we're going to get into, but also I have another part of my headcanon, which is Deltron 3030, Del the Funky Homo Sapien and Dan the Automator's album, that is a futuristic rap that takes place lyrically in the year of 3030. He mentions having to flee the authorities, and there's this line that I want to quote. Don't panic. I landed on planet Mercury, gave it atmosphere, set up my headquarters. I'll never get captured here. I want to posit the theory that Del the Funky Homo Sapien founds the Mercury colony in Witch from Mercury. Especially because we know it's a place for people that are running from trouble to an extent.
Well, I mean, specifically I guess Prospera's sort of nominally the main villain. sort of, but like I mean that's explicitly what they do, right? Is they flee from their persecution and do witchy things on Mercury. So
I'm just saying, if Del
They
the
don't get
Funky
caught.
Homo sapien had set up Mercury as a place that was relatively safe for various types of outlaws and refugees of different struggles, it all fits together. That's all I'm saying.
I'm not gonna lie, I expected this to be a much bigger reach, but
Yeah, this is not a reach at all.
Yeah,
this
it's
this
not
actually this is just canon. This is just canon now.
Well, also he talks about mechs a lot on
Oh?
the album, so that's also I feel strongly that the Deltron 3030 album has a place in Gundam canon to an extent, because he mentions piloting mecha several times on this album. So I just think there's there's an aspect of it that I think it really it's really not a reach.
Length 60 minutes and 18. Oh, and it was released into the. I'm gonna have a fun time listening to this.
Oh, you've never heard this?
I've never heard this. Again, I'm showing my.
Honestly,
I
would love somehow to listen to this together with you for your first time, almost, because wow, you're gonna have such a time. But also, that may or may not happen, and that's okay. I'm just saying though, you're gonna have such a fucking time. Like this is such a magical album, and it is so Gundam.
A rap opera concept album set in 3030. Oh, this is like far UC. Let's go.
Well, we don't know exactly when Ad Astra takes place relative to our time, so I'm just estimating that it's taking place after 3030. This is now something we can peg it by.
Yeah.
So this is part of my complex headcanon for Mercury. First of all, is that Del the Funky Homo sapien founded the Mercury colony that Prospera flees to. Another really important part of my headcanon about Gundam now is that the entire Fast and the Furious series is a prequel to Gundam. Why do I say this? Particularly, this lines up with the Universal Century, but there's an extent to which you could think of it as a prequel to any Gundam. It's because, again, okay, well, so what is a new type exactly? It's like somebody who has like weird empathetic psychic powers and is really good at driving something. Like, that's like generally like you're somewhere in that spectrum of stuff.
Yeah.
If you're getting called a new type, right?
Yeah.
So as I was watching Fast and the Furious, I started to realize the one and only explanation for the Fast and Furious movies is that these folks that we are watching, Dominic Toretto and his family, are new types. And if you put it into that perspective, everything makes perfect sense. Dominic Toretto literally does psychometry in, I think, the fourth movie. It's either the fourth or the fifth.
You're driving into this one alone, I'm afraid. I have no familiarity.
I've only seen Tokyo Drift. I have not seen the series.
So, at the beginning of, I believe it's the fourth movie, someone important, I'm going to try not to spoil it too much because I guess y'all haven't seen it, but someone important to Dominic appears to have been killed. And he goes to the site of this place where this person died, apparently. And there's like some skid marks on the road and a little bit of paint on the road. And he starts like touching and smelling it. And then he starts to like relive and recreate the whole accident. And I was like, this is Gundam. This is fucking Gundam.
Does he ever channel the soul of this dead person into his car to like, perform a particularly like impressive stunt?
There are some things that kind of like cross into that territory. Yeah. Like, especially because like his dad's car, like there's a whole thing surrounding his dad's car and his dad is dead.
Oh.
So that car seems to have mystical powers by channeling the soul of his dad, perhaps to some extent. there's a number of things that line up where it's just like, this actually lines up one for one with something that happens in Gundam in terms of like a new type power. And it's it's like the way that Dom Toretto and his family are in the Fast and Furious series. They're not quite superheroes, but they're more than human in some way. And
Your family.
I think
I know that much.
I think new type ability is pretty much the only explanation for it. It's the only one that makes sense to me anyway. And mild spoiler for the 9th movie, they go to space.
Wait, what?
And I don't want to give away too much, but
I like how that's where you stop him at, like the point of being absurd.
I don't want to give away too much, but let's just say if you watch this sequence of them in space, I feel like anyone who has watched enough Gundam who goes and watches that sequence with this theory in mind would just have to confess that it does seem quite like a new type thing that they do.
Well, I mean, space is apparently where, mankind reaches its, final evolutionary state according to new type theory. So I suppose it only makes sense that that's really where they manifest like the maximization of their powers.
They really manifest some powers in that moment. They really do. And there's even, okay, I almost forgot this part, but there's actually an incredible moment in one of the movies. I can't even remember which one because there's so many fucking Fast and Furious movies. They're all good though, honestly. I think it's the 8th one maybe. But Roman, the character of Roman, who I actually like a lot, one of my favorite characters in the series, starts to posit basically new type theory to the group. He's like, hey, have you noticed that we've gone through a lot of really extreme situations and been kind of fine overall? And they're like, yeah, I guess so. And he's like, don't you think that's kind of odd? Don't you think there's something kind of unusual about that? And they're like, maybe. And he starts to spin off this theory that is essentially new type theory. I swear to fucking God. And then the rest of the group's like, nah, but I'm like, now I have this headcanon that it's like Roman wrote some papers and those became the inspiration for Xeon.
Yeah. There you go. The Xeon Daikun of his own era. How about
He
that?
literally sounded like Xeon Daikun in the origin a little bit as he's given this theory about like, hey, don't you think it's odd that we've scraped through so many of these situations that seem a little improbable?
Nice.
Gotta add this to the UC watch order. Start with all Fast and the Furious movies.
Start with all the Fast and the Furious movies.
Then watch Gundam the Origin.
Then the original. Gotta, make that little interruption for, Kakuru Doan's Island.
I still gotta add that to the watch order.
I really feel like if you could take any of the main Fast and Furious cast and give them that Shinji getting the robot moment where they just have to pilot a Gundam with no training and they do it. Like, I just feel like any of them, like I think that alone just speaks to the fact that, they're new types, right? Like, they've got that Amuro Ray thing going on where it's like, I don't have to have been inside this thing before. I saw a couple of schematics. I can fly it. They literally do that kind of shit all the time in those movies. So anyway, I've been excited to share that theory because I really feel like there's just so many things in these movies that line up. I could go on and on, but I'll cut it off here to be reasonable. That just line up though with just the way in which new types are presented, like special relationship with machines, special relationship with the dead, strange psychic abilities. Powers that come specifically through empathy. because that's the whole family thing. Like that's a whole nother big, like I didn't even hardly get into that, but that's a whole big shtick of the series. And it's like a lot of their powers are empathy based, explicitly. Like they'll like show up places and be like, I felt you, that you needed me. That's new type shit.
Yeah. I'm sold. Until I've been presented with strong evidence to the contrary, I think this is canon.
While you've been explaining this, I've been literally imagining all the Fast movies in like the Zeta Gundam art style, and it's sending me.
Here we go. That Netflix, you're looking for some quote unquote original content. Just animate the Fast and the Furious movies.
So anyway, we'll end this slight derail here, but I don't know. This might even be a subject we'll have to continue to explore another time because there's really a lot to explore here to this idea, and it is just interesting to think about, kind of trying to slot something in to the time before mobile suits and space colonies, and think like this is the precursor. It's just kind of fun.
Yeah. Though it does somewhat, contradict like the new type theory, right? That it's mankind reaches its evolution in space, though. But yeah.
But I think these they're not doing stuff that's as like incredible as what new types can do in Gundam to an extent, right? Because like in Gundam, new types are able to like, shut down like hundreds of mobile suits, or like perform these feats that. So I think it's like these are like baby new types in the Fast and the Furious.
Gotcha, I feel you.
But they go to space, so that it's like I also think the fact that they're being called to space says something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, space is calling to them. That's like peak new type. Oh
yeah, that's like straight up like
rich
dialogue right from UC.
And Gundam writers, if you happen to hear this podcast by some miracle, feel free to take this idea and run with it. There would have to be some like baby new types that would hear that call of space initially, maybe, right? That are like, I don't know. At least it's a possibility. It could be fun.
It makes too much sense, unfortunately, or fortunately.
I love that I'm coming here with these two super smoked out theories about Gundam, and y'all are just like, yeah, okay.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, it seems. I mean, the first one. I mean, it's just like, like the line that like literally like explains what happens in the series, and you're saying it's connected. Yeah, it's like, why not? It's like not really that much of a reach.
Well, I guess we can talk about the witch from Mercury now. I give approval.
I appreciate that this headcanon has been raised. So let's quickly and furiously let's get into it. So, Witch from Mercury, the end. It ended like what? Like a month ago, I want to say, or like a month and a half.
Like that, yeah,
like that.
Yeah, and a half maybe.
Feels like it's been a while, but yeah, it's recent enough. But it feels like it's left a gaping hole in my life.
Definitely, yeah.
Definitely. So I guess let's just start with reactions to the second season itself. How did it stack up, and what were your favorite arcs?
I guess I'll start. I really enjoyed the second season. I kind of liked the different direction when I feel like some of the Earth stuff with like Dawn of Fold and whatnot maybe wasn't as elaborated upon as it maybe ought to have been. I think it's kind of like one of those things where I think it wasn't necessarily crucial to the story they were telling, so they just kind of were like, yeah, like this will kind of sort of serve as like something of like a Deus Ex Machina in terms of just getting characters into like a certain emotional state to advance their arcs. I did really like the role that like Ghoul played with that, though. I thought that was like particularly strong.
Definitely.
And I mean, just generally, the journey our two little space lesbians go. Of course, got to stand our Marxist queen. First season she founded a workers' co-op. Second season she restores the means of production to the proletariat. Like, Murine's pretty base.
We definitely stand.
What about yeah?
I think those are some pretty good takes. I think I have complex feelings about. Part of me felt it was some parts were a little rushed, or maybe could have been a little bit more developed. But then other parts of me felt like, I don't know. I really tried to stay in the mindset that like this is supposed to be Shakespearean to an extent. The whole time I was watching it.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Shakespeare motif was,
Yeah, it was pretty
not
evident.
yeah, it was pretty evident from the beginning.
So I tried to like really keep that mindset in mind. And again, this is no big revelation, but it was just, it was something that I was definitely thinking about. And so I had mixed feelings because like part of me wanted some stuff to be explored a little more, and then other parts of me were like, no, this is pretty much just right for like the type of storytelling that they're trying to do. And I appreciated that to an extent because I actually feel like some of the types of storytelling that they pursued here are types of storytelling that are a little bit underdone in modern media. And then other parts of it felt very modern media, and I thought it was a good blend of those things. So I guess like that's kind of where I landed with a lot of season 2 was like I felt like it had like a good mixture of like classic and modern storytelling elements that came together relatively well, and mostly I was satisfied with it. But then occasionally I was still like, I think I'm happy enough, but I kind of want to tug at the edge here. I kind of want them to show us like 5 more minutes of that.
That's something I was thinking of too, where it's like I think there's not really a standard number of episodes per series, but most Gundam series tend to dance between like that 40 to 50 episode mark.
Yeah.
And for them to end in like about 25, I was like, oh, y'all are stopping here. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think before this, the only like main non build series that ended with 24, 25-ish was Geno Reconquista, which was Tomino's last series. That one I think did a little bit worse with its time. Like this one felt like it was a really condensed story, right? Like you don't have a lot of like wasted time or wasted episodes like the way that some of those like 50 episode ones do, right? Where like there's
No, not at all. It definitely, I would say one thing I was consistently impressed by is I would be like, wow, they crammed a lot into that episode actually after every single episode
without
much,
it feeling really rushed either.
No filler,
it never felt rushed, but it just never felt like there was any filler. It just felt like things were happening all the time. And that's tough, right? Because some of the, like you say, it's like some of the 50 episode arcs, they've got these episodes that are just kind of throwaway, right? And like Iron Blooded Orphans comes to mind as like having a number of episodes that are just like slowed. It just seems like for the sake of killing time.
Yeah, and that one and a few others are definitely guilty of this too, where it's just like it has like a bloated cast, which I don't really feel like was the case here. And I know like I on Reddit as like the season was about halfway through, and people were like, oh, there's gotta be like a season 3 because they gotta flesh out like Shadiq's harem, and I'm like, I could not be less interested in a group of characters than Shadiq's harem. Like I do not want a season devoted to fleshing them out. Like that sounds awful.
It's actually fine if some of them are just bit characters defined by tropes that you can understand easily. Like that's actually
that's exactly what they were.
Like, and the fact that a couple of them got to rise above that a tiny bit is cool. But it doesn't mean that we need to like actually like they're not like all the people who wanted Shadiq's harem. Tell me what's actually interesting about any of those characters. You can't. Like,
Exactly.
Like they served the story well, and they were fine, and some of them even seem to have personality and motivation of their own at times, and that's all good. But whatever.
They all piloted grunt suits. That tells you everything you need to know. That's that's really it.
If you didn't at least get a custom demi trainer, you're out.
Facts.
Well, they had their they like some of them switched because like they had like the Though they did have one of my favorite scenes in the show where one of like the basically the police is like fighting them and he's like, "You pathetic students are no match for us." I was like, wow, like what a punch down. Like
Yeah.
I'd say that arc and then like the arc where Gil's trapped on Earth are probably like the best ones in this season. I think like a side story where they explore some of the stuff on Earth would be quite
like
cool.
the one thing I was disappointed by was like that Ghoul on Earth episode, like the like second like lead character, like Olcott, he just never shows up until like the last episode again. And I was like, that was really disappointing because he seemed like he had like a story to like tell and was worth telling, but they're just like, oh no, he just shows up at the end where they're just like, oh hey, we got what we want. I guess we're no longer terrorists.
Well, here's another thing that I was thinking of like just now is like considering like how much it costs to make media now, especially and like for an anime of that quality and style, how much of it do you want to chalk up to like budget issues too?
Hard to say.
Where it's like, let's just wrap it up here, and then if there is like interest for it, we can pursue it as like a sequel movie or a sequel series or like as a manga or something.
I am kind of curious if there's certain things that like there's certain things that feel like there was production issues. I don't know if they were necessarily budget or what, but like I felt like Delling's virtual absence from the second season, like, you know, he was put in a coma and whatnot, but like it felt like he was a character that like felt really weird to just completely sideline, right? You never get like that direct confrontation
and to, like,
between
never see him be young again felt like a weirdly missed opportunity. Like in the prequel, we see this like glimpse of young Delling.
Yeah.
And I always thought, like, will we ever get like a little glimpse into young Delling again? Like maybe he reveals something about himself to Miorine when he comes out of the coma.
And it was like, it was weird because it was like, you know, season one, especially when it like ends with like, oh, him and Prosper are working together. It's like, oh, like there's clearly something different about that Vanitas incident than what we thought. But then it's like, no, I'm actually like interested in like revenge against your father and ruining his life. But he never gets to really like do anything again. Like he wakes up, he, you know, helps, I guess. But like, I feel like, as I said, to me, it was like, was there some issue with like casting availability for him or something?
Possibly, yeah.
Like it was just like one of those things where I was like, it felt really bizarre that he just became such a non-factor.
I did like his final bit to an extent, but even there, he felt a little underutilized.
Yeah, 100%.
But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I felt like there was some underutilization there. Honestly, I was a big fan of Miorine's second season, just general journey. Especially like she kind of starts that season in this very complex place. She's feeling very judgmental towards Suleta, and you know, I thought it was like a really good arc in terms of her just kind of like learning to accept her own place in all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, like actually like you don't really get to call yourself like a person with clean hands, and you haven't been able to say that since your birth, and that's not fair necessarily, but like it is your reality. And like you may want to feel like you have clean hands to an extent, but like really you don't. And it's like once the blood is directly on her hands, I think she sees more directly. It's like, well, it was kind of always there to an extent. Like,
yeah, and I think that's kind of what drags her out of like that like really deep depression that she's in for like a couple episodes. Is probably that realization in part. And you know, I think Suleta kind of helps her like come to grips with that and whatnot. And that like, you know, not that it's like, you know, totally okay to like, you know, have blood on your hands, but like, you know, it's, you know, like it's life goes on, and you know, it's kind of like what you know make of that, right? You have to kind of, you know,
yeah, and it's the burdens of leadership, right? Like you have to accept responsibility for what you know, what comes with that. You know, and like I think, what Miorin sees ultimately there is that, like, Suletta was more willing to accept those responsibilities, and that doesn't make her all bad, but also she was accepting them for a bad reason, and Miorin needs to fight that. She needs to fight the reason,
Yeah.
And so I like that whole arc. And I think, I don't know, probably generally my favorite moment from season 2 was just when Suletta and Guel have a sword fight.
It was like a friendly match. Yeah.
It's a time-honored Gundam tradition to have the fencing duel at some point.
And I love that it was a proper fencing duel, though. Like,
yeah.
Like,
they had the fencing masks.
They had the masks. And, like, the way that it was scored like that, that's actually not unlike how Olympic fencing is scored now. And I did Olympic fencing in high school, so I'm a nerd about this. I never got to use the electronic jackets because I didn't go to a fancy high school. But I would go to matches and see them used sometimes. And it's it's kind of automatic like that. And so I love that whole thing.
Very cool.
It was just very fun. Very fun. You could tell, one of the great things about Gundam in general is they do their research on details.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just like one of those moments where it's like, as somebody who has done competitive fencing like that, I was like, damn, they really nailed a lot of this. just in these small ways.
Well, and their attention to details, I mean, it's kind of a sidebar from this series, but it's partly why it's taking the better half of a century to get the rest of our Hathaway movies, because they're like, oh well, this takes place, like this movie takes place like on like Ayers Rock, so like the whole cast and crew has to go there. It's like, right, you just wanted to build in a vacation. We get it, like.
Well, I mean, even in the first Hathaway film, like the Philippines references were like I was talking about them, like people I know who are Filipino, and they're like, that's a deep cut. Why would they just put like a Jollibee in this movie for no reason? You're telling me in Universal Century they still have Jollibee? What's going on here? Like, and to Kennedy's point as well. Sorry, that was a digression.
It was a good digression though.
The other arc that really stands out in this season is, I think, the way Suletta has to come into her own after basically being a pawn in everybody's game.
Yeah.
It's kind of heartwarming, and it's also like the way I'm starting to process Witch from Mercury is like they learned all the mistakes from Seed and like didn't repeat them. So, it's like for like a protagonist to sometimes appear empty or like always on the right side of things, that's a constant problem that shows up. So having Suletta be like a pawn in people's game despite being the protagonist, like it lends something to why she's always gung-ho and like ready to fight even in situations that don't make sense. And then for Suletta to like really reckon with it, but like come away from it all as like, yeah, life goes on, like, you can feel bad about it, but if you stop, things could get worse. Which I think is sweet, endearing, and also from a writing standpoint, very simple to get you going in the plot.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, it's one of the things that, like, kind of not just Seed, and Seed's maybe not as guilty of this as some others, but, like, oftentimes a lot of Gundam shows, their protagonist sort of lacks, like, a coherent ideology. Like they're just kind of along for the ride to like do the hero thing.
Seed once again,
yeah. Like like there, like the ideology was kind of it existed, but it was just very simplistic, like pacifism. Whereas here, like, and I don't honestly know that like Suletta has like deep political thoughts about anything, but you at least get the idea that like like there's things that she cares about and like that she's willing to even like it's like towards like her mother and gene donor sister, whatever, however you want to describe that. Spoilers. Yeah, spoilers. I mean, I figured it's kind of a disclaimer in general for this episode. But where it's like kind of her desire to protect them is kind of it's somewhat against their will, right? Like they're like, yeah, we're gonna like, use a super weapon, and we don't, kind of, the end goal of that isn't 100% clear. I mean, that definitely seems to be some type of, domination of, the Ad Stella era or whatever. But, she's willing to, contradict their stated goals to kind of protect them ultimately.
Yeah.
And it kind of leads us to one of our, I mean, Gundam has somewhat, like, happy endings are more common than not, but
it has a really undeserved awful reputation, and it's really rooted in like a couple series.
Yeah.
I feel like that's really I feel like that's really on point, because like a lot of the series, I mean, a lot of them have more so like than anything just kind of bittersweet endings.
Yeah.
Like you think about like the unicorn ending is very bittersweet. But most of the characters that you liked survived.
Yeah.
And like clearly are gonna go on to live full lives, like like to say that it has like a sad, and like they do accomplish some things, and it's like,
yeah.
So it's like there's a bittersweetness to it, but it's not like it feels at the end of Unicorn like it was all for nothing, nor do you feel like all your favorite characters were just ripped away from you in the ending or anything like that.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite series, so I'm just starting there.
And that one's going to probably come up again because the ending of this one is very, very parallel to that one, I think.
Has a lot of parallels, I think, in some ways.
Yeah, I think most people fixate on the ending of Zeta as just being like, oh, it was really bad, but it's like...
And IBO in recent memory. Really
IBO.
To be honest, though, Zeta's ending made sense. It made perfect sense.
Plus, they undid it.
It's confusing, too, though, because one of the most popular beloved series that gets praised to this day is 8th MS Team, which literally has a total happy ending.
Yeah.
Right, like
hey, he loses a leg, that's not that happy.
All the bad, well, still I mean, there are bittersweet aspects to 8th MS Team's ending, but like literally there's an extent to which you get the romantic ending that you were hoping for and everything. Several of the characters kind of go on to decent endings, it seems like. Most of the bad guys die, and I don't know, like if a lot of the good guys seem to ride off in the sunset and a lot of the bad guys die, that's a decent ending, right? I mean, like,
I mean, I think that's like, I mean, I know it's like the kind of primitive read, but I mean that's kind of, I mean, yeah, I mean, how else would you put it? Like,
I mean, I will say that like it's good that a lot of people got to walk away redeemed in the ending. Like it's I like a no one is beyond redemption plotline.
Yeah.
Plus, like, if you consider like just how much like gut wrenching shit happens in this series, I'm okay with,
especially in like the direct lead up to it. Yeah.
Right. We're talking like death on a mass scale in some events. It's like, I don't need like a big all out bloody battle in the finale. We'll be okay without it.
Yeah, totally. I thought the slightly mellow, relatively happy ending was nice. I don't think it's super out of place in Gundam. I think it stands out simply because so very many of the characters that we liked got some kind of positive resolution, which is I think that's a little bit rare, right? Like a lot of times.
Well, I think a lot of the redemption in this one too is pretty rare. Usually the villains just die. Maybe they redeem themselves as they die, but they
right. Like most of the villains got to like go on to something here.
Yeah.
And that was kind of cool. And so, yeah, I think like a lot of the Gundam series, it ends with like, a few of the main characters are kind of like accomplishing the last of the things, and then we find out about their story or whatever, but we don't necessarily hear about everybody. It was kind of nice here how it was like, here's everybody you've basically ever seen, what they're up to now, 3 years
Yeah.
later. Like, that was kind of sweet.
Yeah, and it wasn't like, I thought it was realistic too, where it's like, oh yeah, like there's a lot of work to do to like, kind of make things better in this timeline and whatnot. It's not just like, oh yeah, Suletta made some magic happen in some Gundams, and the world is fixed. Completely, 100%, no problems.
Yeah, and kind of like 8MS Team, Suletta's body is not quite the same, although she at least seems to be on the track that, perhaps she'll have full use of her body eventually with enough, future medicine and physical therapy and etc. But still, I mean, it's like, there's a little there are some aspects that parallel some of that too.
If sure.
I think the visuals in that final scene against Quiet Zero, I still don't fucking know how permit works, and we're gonna get into how I don't fucking understand how permit works. But it was like, again, like to have like those visuals of like the permit fading into dust, and then like there's this like rainbow, and also like for the Caliban final suit like that Soletta has, it's white and it's like got all this like rainbow stuff going on. I'm like, very gay, very beautiful. I love it. I thought it was a visually stunning finale, even though I have no idea what the fuck happened. So I think we hit everything. I also think that this is going to be like a good timeline for side stories. Like they left it just open-ended enough where there's a ton of things you could fit side stories or even like sequels into.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we can have
and
all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, I mentioned that I put on the outline that there is a current ongoing manga, Vanity's Heart, which is I've read the first 2 chapters. It's decent. It's actually I can't say like it's kind of a prequel, like it's in between the prologue and the main series.
Okay, nice.
So
I was hoping that time might get explored in particular.
Yeah, so it's following like this like scientist that was like with the Vanitas Institute, and I guess her patient. I can't remember if the patient it's a child, but then they pilot a version of the Lifrith, the Lifrith Chew, which is if you've seen the kit for that, it's got like this massive like arm that it can hold that like does like finger guns and is like kind of silly but really cool at the same time. But so that's kind of like the story they've been telling, and that's like mostly on Earth. It kind of
be cool if maybe they made a movie out of that or something.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they always do. Like, pretty much every Gundam series has had some type of side story that's like, a little bit more less like stakesy in terms of like the macro effect on the timeline. Most of them don't get animated. I mean, Astray enjoys 10 minutes of animation. I think to this day.
It's good though. It's good 10 minutes.
Basically a commercial.
Basically, yeah. And then just quickly, who were your favorite characters from the series, and what was your favorite mobile suit?
Gosh, I mean, Suletta and Miriam are kind of, obviously those, those two are pretty great. Ghoul, I mean, it's kind of hard to like narrow down. Ghoul was great. I liked both of the, I guess the 2 enhanced person, not Elon's, so like the 4 and 5. I thought I enjoyed like the contrast they had, and I kind of liked, Fifth had I think he had a pretty decent arc. It wasn't maybe as pronounced as Ghoul's, but I kind of enjoyed, seeing him go from like this kind of creep to someone who actually, cares about people other than himself. And I mean, Prospera, I think is probably, up there in terms of like, I think one of the better Gundam villains and better Char clones in general that we've gotten. Mobile suit wise, I mean, yeah, just said the Caliban's was a really nice one. I always really liked the Fire Act too, and the Darrow blade as well that Ghoul used, I thought was also pretty nice. Kind of weird as like the red mobile suit not really being like associated with like a main antagonist, but here we were.
Yeah, totally. I thought, I definitely want to draw attention to just the main characters were very strong. Suletta and Miorin really deserve some attention just because some Gundam series do suffer from a bit of a weak protagonist, and we didn't have that problem here.
Mhm.
I really liked Shadiq also. And also I thought Shadiq was a really well realized villain that felt, not like a pure evil with, but like a very
Sure.
complex villain that I very much enjoyed getting to know. And I would say his plots kept me on my toes more than any of the other sort of villainous characters, I think. I even like Prospera, I saw a few more of her twists coming, whereas some of Shadiq's plots caught me off guard, and I was like, "Oh, this is great! This really throws things into a complex situation when I thought they were going to be simpler." So I ended up enjoying that character a lot, and I want to shout out Choo Choo.
Hell yeah, hell yeah.
I was a big Choo Choo stan.
Choo Choo did nothing wrong.
Choo Choo did nothing wrong at any point in the show.
I did love with her where everyone like, because the characters that she like punched out from I can't remember where they were from, but like the one that she like knocked out, like none of them were seen for like until like the last couple episodes, so everyone just thought like she legit just killed them. But then she did show. Then they did show up, and she like helped feed them after the traumatic events at the school, and I was like, oh, I guess that's
first Gundam with a school shooting.
It took long enough, right?
Most American Gundam series confirmed.
No kidding. But yeah, Choo Choo, I think they did a good job with her of like, she's the person she's kind of got the intolerant attitude towards Spatians, but she's softening up as she meets Suletta. And it's like that arc could have been simpler, but they did a good job with it. Even if she wasn't like too far into it.
And she wasn't really an important character either. So like the fact that they did put as much effort into her, I think was really appreciated.
Yeah, and they gave a lot of details that character that I appreciated in general, and I just felt like she was just like a very great supporting character in so much of the second half in particular. And of course she's got pink hair, so we're from the same genetic line. So
is that what it is?
So I have to take her side for that reason as well. And she kind of drippy with the hoodie.
A little bit, yeah. So is Choo Choo gonna be your firstborn's name or no?
Okay. But I really felt like Choo Choo was a character that I felt like a lot of the Earth House characters got to shine in their own small ways, but I thought Choo Choo in particular shone especially bright as a great supporting character for this show. And then as far as suits go, well, first of all, big time Calibarn. I loved the Calibarn Gundam when that came out at the end. I thought that one looked dope.
Yeah.
I thought that was like great refinement of the Lefrith look.
I will say it is weird that having that giant like gun with like thrusters on the end literally made it like a witch's broomstick.
Yeah, very deliberate.
Very deliberate. Very on the nose.
It was so sick.
It was sick, honestly. No, people. I've seen
only slightly more subtle than some G Gundam designs.
And I also like the vibe of the Calibarn. It like it had that like tall geese feeling, It felt dangerous in that way, but it also felt like a beast that maybe you could make friends with in some way, but only in that way.
Like a unicorn and the tall geese. If they had a love child, that's what it would be.
Yeah, but it's like you can't really tame it. It's like a predator, It's the nope thing. You can only enter a contract with it, right? Like it had that vibe with the Calibarn, like you are not gonna tame this thing. You might be able to work with it for a little while.
Yeah.
So I was a really big fan of that one. Um, I would say, I'm trying to think of outside of that. Honestly, I kind of liked Pale's stuff, the Zowort, and of course the Faract.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I thought Grassley's systems were also kind of cool. Like, I'm not always into that kind of Evangelion sort of look, but I thought that the Grassley systems, they kind of landed the sweet spot where it's like it still looked like Gundam shit, but it looked a
Mhm.
little bit, just a little bit different. But I
Yeah,
also
it
like
kind
that
of.
in particular they had like a little bit of kind of a feudal
Yeah, they
feel to
look.
them.
They have a very. They look like a streamlined version of like the Crossbone Vanguard from F91. That's very much the vibe that their suits gave.
Yeah.
Not to be confused with the Crossbone Vanguard that has the Crossbone Gundams, but their predecessors who are Cosmo aristocrats in their own.
So yeah, I thought a lot of the Grassley suits were kind of lit as well. So I think that's where I land with that stuff. Calibar and Gundam definitely those just that's my favorite.
I do have to admit, I do have a soft spot for the Lifra Thorn too. The little chicken-legged one. I know
Oh, yeah,
everyone
yeah.
hated it, and I just found it really charming. I was wrong. I did expect that those two, the Earth Lifrifs, were going to combine, just with their exaggerated proportions, because I was like, oh, it would, one has really long legs, the other doesn't, and then nothing happened. So
That
Yeah.
would not have shocked me either, because the one also kind of had the bulky shoulders.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it was like they would
Um,
fill out the design, right? And it just never happened.
But I think they probably even maybe considered that, but they didn't want to go with those folks as like the main villains. So
Yeah. Oh, they very quickly
So,
made that choice, right? I mean, one of them died pretty early on to season 2.
I guess let's go. Okay, actually, I see. I was gonna mention something, but it's in this list, so I guess let's
Well,
get
let's
into
let's
your.
let's get Adi's little favorites.
Oh, yeah, Adi.
I think it's very hard to pick favorites in a series like this. I'd say by far my favorite mobile suit would have to be the OG Ariel. I love how the Caliban looked. I even like the Ariel rebuild, but there was just something like nice about seeing like the OG Gundam colors like reimagined, because that was the whole goal with this series is like, let's bring Gundam to like an audience that has never seen it before and probably
Yeah.
like is going to project expectations based on the old material. So like, if I love seeing like the main Gundam being reimagined, I think that's cool.
Yeah.
And again, just like the shield being able to transform into like the different bits, and you can use them as armor, as remote weapons. I thought was always cool.
It is hard to choose though, because literally every mobile suit looked good. I thought.
Yeah, there
Yeah.
really wasn't any duds.
And they were all like, they did the cool thing where the mobile suit matches the personality of the character piloting it. So it's like, who's your favorite character? Unfortunately, it's Soletta. Like that's how I look at it. But I think Ghoul is also a strong one. Murene was also a really strong character. I think everyone in Earth House was cool. Shadiq did nothing wrong. That's very controversial, but that's me. But yeah, I think like by and far, Soletta is like one of my favorite.
I don't know if
protagonists.
I'm gonna go all the way to Shadiq did nothing
Yeah,
wrong, but
no.
I am in the free Shadiq category. So if that,
I came around to him in the end, but like he was definitely one of those characters
Yeah,
that I
the
just kinda,
middle
like,
of the
loved to
series.
hate in the middle of the series, where I was just like, yeah, like this guy's kind of a scumbag. But like it was like in a way that I was like, this is like good though. But it was like, yeah, like I mean, I understood some of his motivations. I think he, it was more so I think he wanted to be the center of them rather than just be like, this like, and he kind of falls into that like sort of personally privileged revolutionary trope a little bit, which is not, far from a, uncharted territory in Gundam, but
Yeah, and obviously that draws from real historical stuff very well in a lot of ways, and I think that again, free Shadik, but I don't know if I could say he did nothing wrong because I think that Shadik's misogyny must be examined, Adi.
Oh,
We should.
He's a total incel too. I mean, like,
Yeah.
let's
No, like
face it.
I said that as a joke. Like honestly, like when Shadik was like orchestrating
I
the
know, I'm just
plot and
joking.
like, I know.
I mean, the man facilitated a school shooting, Adi.
He literally did. I also say that like the
you know
villain.
what? Wait, is this? Hold on. There were 2 shooters, and then there's one conspirator, Shadik, who sets the whole thing up. Is this based on the Columbine conspiracy where there was that
There
third guy?
we go. There we go.
Oh my god.
The parapolitics of Witch from
no.
Mercury. Here we go. In all seriousness, like I think also the villain synergy is really good because like usually you have like a factional enemy and you have like the military leaders in those factions, and you would assemble your hierarchy of evil based on that. Here, because Ancapistan is the setting, it's actually like funny to see how like there's multiple competing cliques of villains who will all turn on each other if given the chance.
It's like the top of the power structure is like the villain in this, right? Because that's really like all the villains are just like it's whoever's at the top, right? Shadik's sort of at the top of his little, component of it. The Prosper is at the top of hers. And then you have like kind of the National Assembly League at the very, very end.
Right.
Which is, kind of a little different too, but it's mostly it's like or I mean like the fail hags, right, are also kind of
You said pale hags and not fail hags, right? That would have been funny.
What was that?
You said pale hags and not the fail hags, right?
I meant fail, but I might have mispronounced it. But no, the
fail hags. I'll just shorten that to fags.
I'd rather you say it than me. But yeah, I mean, like those, I mean, like, and like their whole thing, right, is such that they represent sort of like this, like they're like kind of living embodiments of corporate greed, right? And like literally using humans as resources and disposing of them when they're not, no longer profitable.
Yeah. I liked that even real Elon was just like, at the end, he was just like, yeah, I'm out. I took a job at Jet Turk. Y'all are fucking crazy and weird.
He's like, yeah, thanks for the clones, but
peace.
This is too much even for me. I need to get me some of that Earth coochie. You feel me? Oh gosh. So I guess let's get into our extended discussion, right? So I think we talked a little bit about this, which is the series, was intending to bring in a new audience for Gundam, but took a new route in setting up the story with the Academy plot, and try to avoid being like a formulaic retelling of Universal Century. So did it work? Did it maintain a fundamental understanding of what made Gundam?
I thought it did a pretty good job in terms of, I know a lot of people that watched this that either had no Gundam or little Gundam experience. I'm not saying it captured absolutely everybody, but just in my experience, it seemed like a lot of people that hadn't previously necessarily given that much of the time of day to Gundam gave this a chance and enjoyed it. And so I definitely saw some people picking this show up in exactly the way that they seem to be hoping for. So I think from that perspective, I have to say that it was at least somewhat successful. And I do think that it overall did a good job of introducing folks to a lot of the concepts of what Gundam is about, and things like that. I think one of Gundam's problems, though, that they still struggled to navigate here to an extent is their whole timeline situation. That's confusing as fuck to people that don't know about it yet. Whenever I start to try to introduce that to somebody who doesn't understand it yet, they're always so fucking confused. And it's not that it's that complicated, but it's just that on face value, it's just one of those things that just obfuscates and just makes people. I think it leaves a lot of people feeling like they don't know what to watch.
And it's funny because it's set up, I think, in order to make it easier to watch, right? Because it's like, it's like you don't have to, like, if you want like minimal baggage, here's XYZ timelines, right? This one, wing, whatever, like anything that just stands alone. But then, you see is like, if you want the baggage, it's like, okay, I'd like, figure that watch order out. I mean, it's kind of, but I think it's just when you talk about it as like timelines versus just like, because it's like I get that they set it up as like these different like points of entry, I think is like the main idea, but I think and I think just sort of like the sort of mainstream nature of like multiverses with all of like the comic book movies now and stuff like that right now, I think that might further obscure things where people are like expecting like crossovers that are unlikely to happen outside of the context of video games and
build diverse situations.
Yeah, but then they're like the crossovers are just like cameos, not so much like
Right. It's not really
yeah.
It's not really like the universes themselves actually colliding.
Right.
And I think part of the issue too is it's that it's not clear to folks on the outside which ones are which, I think is a big part of the problem. And on a casual glance, like if you showed somebody 5 minutes of like 6 different Gundam series and then asked them to tell them apart, they'd all be like, somebody who had never seen any of them before would just be like, that was all the same show. Right.
Or like the standout would just be like the animation style changes. But not even so much that they'd be able to tell the timelines apart, but like,
right. They might be like,
Unicorn, you might
older,
not necessarily
that
make
one's
the connection.
newer.
Yeah, you might not necessarily make the connection that like, oh yes, that original show from the 70s is connected to this.
But if you showed somebody like some of the designs from Gundam Wing, and then you showed them some of the designs from the original Mobile Suit Gundam, and you said, oh, these are not from the same show, and they don't know anything about this yet, they're just going to be confused.
Well, and even their first entry point into like those alternate timelines, right? Like G Wing and X like look very similar
because they were animated around the same time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
G Gundam and Wing look very similar in a lot of ways, and yeah, totally. So it's like, I don't think that this show did anything to help that in particular. And in fact, like I found that like one of the conversations that I had over and over again in trying to get people into Witch from Mercury is they'd be like, well, what do I have to have watched to have seen it? And I'm like, oh no, this one's completely standalone. And it's like, I think even though they tried to advertise that to an extent, like that was just still not clear to a lot of people that I talked to, in my experience, especially early on. I think over time as the show, got out there and there's more conversation about it, obviously that helps. But like in the early days when there's only a couple episodes out and you're trying to tell people about it, a lot of people were like, well, I've never seen a Gundam before. Can I watch this, basically? And I just don't think that this show did much to help with that problem in any significant way.
Fucking normies, man.
Honestly, there's always something like that's imposing about timelines and like canon.
Anything that's been going this long is imposing inherently.
I'm remembering an argument I got into with somebody, a really dumb one, where it's just like, how does the Legend of Zelda timeline work? And it's like, it doesn't matter if it works, they're just games. But this person had these expectations from watching Marvel movies, right? That like, doesn't it all cross over and coalesce at some point? So I don't know if you can necessarily stop people from having expectations based on that, but that is like the oft asked question for like newcomers into Gundam, which is like, where do I begin with this? And truth be told, like if the three of us were asked like, what was the first thing you saw? the first thing I saw was SD Gundam, which is like this like animated show for like mainly directed at kids, has nothing to do with any of the timelines.
Other than just recycling their designs and
basically
changing them up a bit.
Basically, so it's like, and like that got me into the rest of the series, and like again, has nothing to do with it. Not even the same themes, like night and day. The only thing that maintains Gundam series across timelines is just the VFin, if even.
First thing I ever saw was Wing.
Yeah, mine was G, so 3 different things.
3 completely different series, not even in the same wheelhouse.
Yeah. So yeah.
Josh, you added this.
Succeeded mostly, but maybe not in every way.
Yeah, so I added because you had mentioned that kind of like, unlike C, this didn't really kind of go for like the retelling of UC. But I did think, so like there's a couple other series that kind of, there was, Double O is very much like, I don't know if Kennedy, if you've watched it, and I know obviously you've watched Wing, but like
I have watched Double O, but oof.
Well, and it's like the Double O, like a lot of people kind of point out, like there's a lot of parallels with it and Wing, right? It's kind of like you've got like the similar structure, you got like the more shonen protagonist style like team, similar themes and concepts through that, and this I had seen someone like kind of mention this, and I was already kind of putting it together in my mind that this series has a fair bit of parallels of G Gundam. And what made me think of it was I had watched a clip where someone was playing SD Battle Alliance, and they had Suletta with Domon on their team, and like there's like those little character interactions, and their interaction was just like reciting like the start of like their battle thing, right? Like so he's like Gundam fight ready go, and she's the scales of Libra and blah blah blah, from this, and I was like it's kind of similar. You've got like these like more like formalized structures for like how people fight and whatnot. It's not supposed to be lethal or deadly. The way conflict is done, right? In G Gundam, it's basically whoever wins this battle royale gets to control the world, right? They just get one mobile suit to fight in there, and whoever wins this tournament gets to run the entire Earth sphere on all the colonies, and Earth is sort of the backdrop for the conflict. In this show, you have like sort of the they called it arms partitioning on Earth, where like you sort of have this conflict there, kind of just to justify the need to produce weapons. And Earth is kind of just this backdrop, right? Earth itself has no political power; it's all up in space, just like in G Gundam. It's kind of tied to whoever has like the best technology and whatnot. And I was like, I think there's a lot of themes that definitely ran parallel there, in my opinion.
I think that's fair. I haven't seen G Gundam yet. So
no, there's definitely some parallels to G Gundam. It was apparent, I felt. Obviously, it's different in a number of ways.
It is different in a number of key ways, but I think there is enough shared.
I still think that there are some key parallels that sort of lined up, and I think especially just that motif, of course, of challenging someone to a duel and it being this kind of formal thing, as opposed to like a battlefield
or a war crime.
Yeah. Obviously that draws some parallel to G Gundam. And the way in which just the manner in which it was conducted just felt a little G Gundam-esque. So I can see it. I can definitely see it. Yeah.
I think
Double O Gundam.
Someone told me it's like, what if like the Justice League was Gundam, and I'm like, I don't know about that.
For G Witch?
For Double O.
If the Justice no, I don't think the Justice League is that active. like that proactive because it's like it's kind of like what if the Illuminati had mobile suits is probably more so Double O's thing.
Yeah, that probably makes more sense.
It is kind of like Jewish conspiracy.
Yeah.
Jewish conspiracy, but they keep the peace. They use Jewish space lasers on their Gundams for the peace.
Which may or may not have contributed to my distaste for it.
Yeah, there's some weird. Yeah, I mean, that's probably that's its own episode in the future, maybe.
Let's move on.
Double O. Let's not go down that road.
I mean, I think I enjoyed it a little bit more, but like when you like mentioned like that stuff, I was like, you know, I kind of see it. Like,
all I know is that Double O has that crazy plot line where like Setsuna becomes an alien at some point, and I don't know how we get there.
Oh, like the whole series kind of builds the idea of like, you know, because it's, you know, it's kind of the whole Gundam, you know, transhumanism forming dialogue with each other and whatnot, and sort of the tie-in with that with Double O was like, well, what's the step beyond that is, you know, dialogue with aliens, and they're kind of like they're like these metallic. I mean, I guess they're probably more symbiotes than parasites, but you know, that's kind of how that happens. So it makes more sense than, you know, it maybe sounds at first glance, though still weird and polarizing.
I'll have to.
What I'll always remember about Double O Gundam is I could never be a Gundam. That line of dialogue.
That's the one commonality between Setsuna Seiei and Eric Samaya. They can both say we are Gundam.
Yeah.
One more literally than the other. That's all I'm going to say on that. Oh boy. Yeah. So this was like one of the novel things about this setting that I think sets it apart. So having the space sphere be controlled by like totalizing private entities, or this Ancapistan setting as we've called it before. What does it get right about increased corporate control, and specifically how it exacerbates injustice, war, etc.? Did the setting explore these ideas far enough? And how do the fronts compare to Anaheim Electronics in the UC or Morgan Road in Seed, for example?
I think it's a bit different than like what we had with, like Anaheim, especially because like Anaheim, like for like a solid 30 years has like a monopoly on everything you see. Whereas like here it's like at least kind of like divvied up between these corporations that are like, you know, they're kind of in league with one another, but you get more of that like, you know, corporate intrigue, like let's try to assassinate our president and replace him because we want to.
It doesn't feel like there's as much internal pressure towards that kind of outcome with Anaheim, because it's like they're just getting the money.
Yeah, and it's like it's not until like, you know, their CEO gets, you know, their conspiracy is exposed and they're, you know, thrown into like military prison and Unicorn that like it really, you know, that like that doesn't really like impact them. So it's a little different, I think, than that. I think in general though, I think it does a good job of like kind of showing like the evils of this kind of system though, and you know, like whether or not people see the parallels with, you know, reality is kind of, you know, up to, I guess, you know, not to say how woke they are, but, you know, with how, you know, aware they are of like, you know, actual real injustices and whatnot. But I think I think there was definitely some really powerful themes that were tied with that component of the setting.
Well, I'm going to get real political for a second.
Here? Really?
Because I think, you know, like Anaheim's grip on the solar system in the UC is kind of more like American big military industrial corporations that
Very
sort of
Halliburton
provide.
esque, yeah.
Yeah.
And it kind of fits like the unipolar, kind of dynamic too.
Yeah, it's like they're providing arms to both sides of these conflicts a lot, which we have a lot with these big military industrial corporations that have come out of the United States. You see it all the time where it's like on both sides of the conflict, it's like they're using the same guns and bombs, right? And so that I think that Anaheim really spoke to like that reality.
Yeah.
That was like arriving at that time. And I think here it's like they're kind of speaking to like what comes to mind for me is more like, I think about like Prigozhin, right? How we've been enabling more and more of these like private military corporations to exist worldwide. And like they're gaining increasing power. And it's like one of them has finally made a play for the chips. It was only a matter of time. They didn't succeed, but it's also like, is this going to be a wake-up call that stops any of these countries from just continuing to enable these private military corporations? Or are we just going to keep doing it knowing that, like, okay, the next time it happens, they probably will succeed, whoever it is, right? Like, or at least there's a much higher likelihood.
Well, that is kind of an important distinction, too, between like these and Anaheim is, like, the only like semblance we get of like kind of them funding both sides, and it is kind of a firm rejection of that, which is that like Donald uses Jetark mobile suits, and the CEO and his son are both very like, what the fuck? Like, why do you have these?
Yeah. It's very different vibe in that regard.
Kind of like Toyota when they found out about the ISIS trucks.
Yeah,
arguably, yeah. Although they may have known.
Let's be clear, it's highly likely. It's highly likely.
But also,
in both cases,
maybe Jeturk nuance. I mean, maybe the CEO didn't know, but like maybe people.
There could have been someone under.
It's very likely in the. It's not. It probably
but with
wasn't.
Anaheim, it's explicit. Like
back to ISIS. It's with Toyota. It's like it probably wasn't the CEO of Toyota that was like, yeah, let's sell to ISIS, right? But there's probably some guy at a relatively high level that was like, these trucks are going to ISIS. Well, it's a big order. I'm signing on it. And it's like, Jeturk may have had the same thing going on, right? Where there's some guy at a relatively high management level that was like, well, these are going to the Donna Fold, but it's a big sale. I'm just going to approve it.
I 100% believe in this timeline. They sell these mobile suits like they do at car dealerships. I'm 100% convinced.
Oh, probably. So yeah, I think like the vibe of like private military corporations was really present here, and just that sort of feeling I felt strongly. I think they did a good job with the Ancapistan setting. Like, I think they did a good job in regards to like they showed that like, yeah, it won't all be bad, but it'll be bad for a lot of people, like kind of vibe that I think is very accurate. And I also think they did a good job of just emphasizing that it's like, this is kind of a return to feudalism. Like, but I also think that simultaneously they didn't lean into that too hard, right? Because like, you could just be like, go way harder into like, look, it's feudalism. But I think they did a good job of being like, this is its own unique thing. It's not like other things, this sort of Ancapistan thing, but it has aspects of other things.
And they did try to portray like some of the more forceful attempts to change the system as like, worse than the disease itself, and capitalism, whatnot. So like, it's kind of like, I kind of, it's critical of it for sure, but it's not, it definitely is not exactly, in favor of, and I need to be fair. I mean, Gundam in general is not really like super pro-revolutionary. They're always kind of, given sort of a bad tinge in the series. So
Yeah, I think when it comes to like how they handle politics and political themes in this series, Gundam can never be 100% explicit about what they're trying to say or what it
It's
needs.
good at showing you what's bad, but not good at like
Exactly.
proposing like a solution.
And that's the thing is like, to be honest, like, should media like this be giving people a solution? I don't necessarily believe so. However,
Mhm.
I think where the series shined was like showing the social stratification in like the society as a result. So like the way like the Spatian kids like all bully like Earth House.
Yeah.
And like how they're kind of seen as like really like grubs for showing up, and like them having any aspirations at all is like laughable. And then even when you go to the Earth sphere specifically, like the parts we do see are like deindustrialized, and like it's like you could tell that the cash is not on Earth, and like there's very little like financial resources on Earth left, so people have to turn to alternative means to like resist. And then even like the Earth government that's there is like understandably hostile to Miorine, because it's like, yeah, okay, cool, you feel guilty, so you came here. What does that do for me? It makes complete sense. But at the same time, it's like I was worried they were going to go on this weird route of like it's bad to to fight back, and like we shouldn't be sympathetic to people who resist. And I think they avoided going down that road.
Yeah.
In the sense, like, again, like I wish they spent more time on like exploring how this like resistance movement on Earth works. But I think like they could have dwelled on it too long, and then also made like a really bad political point about it too. So they actually avoided doing that.
Yeah, and I mean, and like there's still like weird, kind of honestly bothersome implications with them, right? Where it's like, like we're kind of sympathetic to like, Dawn of Fold a little bit, in the sense that like, yeah, like they're sort of downtrodden and oppressed, like, and we're sympathetic to that. But at the same time, they like, I mean, they employ child soldiers,
Right.
and in like through a pretty unethical means, and like they don't like. I don't think like Sophie and Noria were like necessarily explicitly cyber new types, or like whatever the equivalent would be, but they're like heavily coded as such, right? With their personalities and their fates draw very heavy parallels with like every other character that fell into those categories. So it's like kind of like, like, hey, like maybe the head of this terrorist organization doesn't, deserve like a pat on the back at the end of the series. Like, we didn't really,
Of course.
interrogate the idea that like, this was pretty unethical, regardless of, how you feel about the people they were fighting. Like, you used these kids in a really awful way.
Yeah, I kind of wish they spent just a little more time on explaining the witches from Earth, as they're called. And
Yeah.
maybe just more. Again, we'll probably get to this when we ask what the fuck is Permet, but they keep saying the word witch. I don't know what they mean by that, other than like,
So the witch
Well, I
just
think
seems.
that's intentional. I don't think witch is meant to like have like a one defined meaning per se.
It was used interchangeably to refer to Gundam pilots and Gundam developers.
yeah,
In the
I recall
show.
that much at least.
Yeah, and also anyone just kind of with any relationship to those things to some extent could maybe just kind of at a certain point especially. I thought actually like the slightly loose use of it was great, because it's like it's just this word of persecution to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so yeah.
I mean, the Earth
I
Girls, I
also
think,
had
owned it a little bit more, but it's definitely used a little more persecutory by everyone else.
yeah. I had definitely also hoped that they might explore the Earth Witches just a teeny tiny bit more. But honestly, I was just excited because I had been speculating about there being more witches. When they showed up, I was just so thrilled. And I also just like towards the end when it's like Gundams just start falling out of everybody's pockets.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
honestly, like that could have been like dumb, but it felt right. It felt like, okay, yeah, we're all revealing that we've been secretly holding on to a Gundam, okay? Fuck it. We've all had one. All right? Are you happy? And it was just like, I don't know. I loved that actually as like a like
Oh, yeah,
something
especially
about
when
that
the
felt very
God,
real.
what's that last one? The Chatark one, especially, where it's
The
just
short
like,
set. The short
Schwarzette.
set.
yeah, Schwarzette, where she's just where La Prosper's like, oh yeah, of course we're developing this. Like, that was,
We have a
you
secret
know,
Gundam, duh.
yeah, like you should, in fact, you should show it off, to sell more of them.
We're not working on nukes. Do you have a nuke? I got one. You got one? I got one. It's like it's what series was that? That was Stardust
0083.
Memory, right?
Yeah, Stardust Memory.
It's like we're not working on nukes. You have a nuke right here. Oh, that's us. Shit. Oh, oops, my bad.
You
I would-
working on nukes? I'm
I
not
always
working on
loved
nukes.
the I mean, this is a little bit of tangent with that series, but I always loved how they took the moral high ground of like they violated the treaty, so we stole their nuke and we're gonna use it against them. It's like not exactly a moral high ground to take, but fair
Not
enough.
exactly, no.
They were wild for that one. Okay. So another theme that came up a lot in this series, transhumanism. Admittedly, it's somewhat of a bogeyman concept for me, just because the way our modern tech gurus are applying the concept, it looks scary with stuff like Neuralink, and like mind wiping considerations. It seems odd. But in this series, it's explored more so as a means of medical technology, as well as one where it can also be applied to warfare and preserving consciousness in life and death. So, does the show make any significant points on these themes? And then to that end too, does the permit system, as shown on the series, does it make sense or appeal as a Gundam gimmick?
So I think I thought the transhumanism wasn't necessarily explored nearly as deeply as it could have been.
Well, and it's been explored in so many Gundam works.
Yeah, I
sometimes
mean,
much
like,
more explicitly.
yeah, like you got things like Thunderbolt that get way more into that. But I liked that it was relatively presented as like a positive here, where it was like, hey, maybe, it would be good if we replaced somebody's arm if they lost an arm.
Yeah.
But and I did like that there was a little bit more of like a direct medical application discussed here, whereas a lot of them, it's like, occasionally there's like a character who'll be like, oh, we're developing mobile suits for good, and it's like, well, what does that mean? But here it was like, oh, well, like this technology can be used for like prosthetics and maybe some other fun stuff.
Yeah, and I think they also did a good job of just demonstrating that, mobile suits could be used for work in some background scenes a little bit.
Yeah.
So it kind of just drove home the point that it's like, maybe these don't have to be weapons of war. As far as Permit goes, my sense of Permit is that in the UC, they have a lot of, several different complex themes that all kind of come together in these ways that allow these like sort of crazy things to happen in the UC that can be very just like, what the fuck is even going on to people that don't know what, haven't seen enough of this stuff. And I think that Permit was an attempt to kind of distill a lot of the complex ideas of the UC down, where it's like, in the UC, you have these several different overlapping technologies that lead to some of the things that come later. And it's like Permit is kind of like, I saw it as like a way to try to kind of sidestep all of these complex technologies, their need to be developed, and say, well, there's this thing called Permit and that can kind of provide like psychometry type effects.
Yeah, I think it had it was like kind of mixing like the phenomenon of like kind of like new types and like new type ability, right? With like the Minovsky particles that are like everywhere in UC, which are kind of like it's why they needed like psychic technology, because it was like the only thing that could actually kind of like pierce the veil of them, because like everything just uses Minovsky particles for everything, like to communicate, to stop communications, to move mobile suits properly, to power them. So I think it's kind of a mix of that. It felt a little similar in terms of like how it was used by the Gundams, like, because I mean they established that I think relatively late that like everything uses it. That might have been established earlier too, but I only really recall them bringing emphasis to it later. But I think for like the Gundams explicitly, where like, you know, they kind of have that like kind of weird, you know, effect on their pilots, right, where they're like exposed to the data storm. It felt very similar to like the Alia Vinya system in IBO, which is like a much more grotesque body horror version of it.
Yeah.
Where, you know, they've had this like, you know, procedure where they've got like, you know, basically like a data jack in their spine to like directly control you know, machinery and whatnot. And that kind of felt like a bit of what they were going for with it. So I think it, you know, kind of your confusion, I think, is largely rooted in the fact that it's kind of just this end all be all thing. That, you know, it's like Quiet Zero as well, of course, right? Is sort of predicated on the fact that everything uses this so it can just shut down machines at will. Maybe do other stuff too that we don't, you know, totally get to see.
Yeah, it was kind of like if you turn Minovsky particles up to 11.
Yeah.
In some ways. But also, like I say, it's like you're combining aspects of other UC technology. Like, because for instance, in the UC, you know, one of the defining changes is when they start making mobile suits where it's like the entire thing is thinking. The entire thing has like, you have like, you know, processors dispersed throughout the entire.
Yeah, the psycho frame.
Yeah. And it's
which
like,
also kind of ties into how the permits used at the end too, like when we get like the little like, you know, here's all the dead people.
right.
That's very much particularly narrative delves heavily into the idea that like, you know, we can like that human will can sort of survive within the, you know, machine or, you know, parts of the machine or whatever.
There was definitely an aspect of this that felt like narrative Gundam for sure.
Yeah. Narrative and Unicorn especially, like especially like near the end. Like, I mean, there's a lot of people who've done some like, you know, little compilations where like when the Caliburn shows up, it's virtually identical to I think the ending of episode 6 of Unicorn.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. There's a lot of parallels, of course, you know, when the space laser, I can't remember what they called it in this. I think it was an energy transfer thing. They're just like, we're just weaponizing it. Like,
we're just weaponizing.
But the way that gets shut down is very similar to, you know, what happened, and blocked is very similar to stuff that happens in Unicorn. Like, it's like a lot of stuff was like very much like, okay, we're doing this again. And I mean, I'm a big fan of Unicorn, so I wasn't gonna complain, but I was like, oh hey, like, you know, it felt like, you know, like comfort food in some ways.
Yeah, totally.
I can't wait to get to Unicorn when I get to it. I'm finally making some headway in ZZ, so like as soon as I'm done with Double Zeta, I'm putting on Unicorn.
Let's keep it moving just because I do have a bit of a time obligation.
Okay. Yeah. We're almost done here. So
yeah.
And actually we covered this part, so we can leave that. So okay.
Well, I do appreciate part of your outline has not aged the best. With the
let's get into that.
themes as the first Gundam series to openly make a queer relationship.
Turns out life comes at you fast when you're making outlines. So I initially wrote this as the first Gundam series to openly make a queer relationship a feature of the show and plot. What did they get right / wrong? and what treatment of gender are we getting in Witch from Mercury versus other series. Now, after I wrote this outline, a statement comes out from Bandai specifically. So not the show, but from Bandai, who own the rights to Gundam, say, we didn't say formally that they're gay, so stop saying it. That's fundamentally what they said.
Yeah, that it's up for they said it's up for interpretation.
How the fuck else am I supposed to interpret that?
I think it's worth noting, not that it makes it okay in any way that they said it, but that they said it after there was pressure to censor parts of the ending in some places.
Yes.
So I think like it's a blow for like honestly, it's very frustrating for them to do this shit. But I just think it's worth noting that it's like they're probably doing it to try to do damage control because
and I think,
and I don't think that makes it right. I'm just saying
right. It's like, I mean, not to like, celebrate this, but like it's a relatively progressive walk back compared to like what I've seen a lot of other companies do in similar situations where it's like it's up for interpretation. So like obviously like it's kind of trying to have their cake and eat it too, where it's like for people who want it to be gay, it's gay. For people who don't want it to be, yes, they have wedding rings in the last episode, and you don't see anyone else in the relationship, so who knows. I suppose you could imagine some, something else if you're really that homophobic.
Well, in the 3 interim years, this is what.
Hey, I mean, I guess 3 years is a long time, but yeah, I mean I say that's just kind of silly. But
here's another thing that like I just wanted to get at, right? It's like we've talked about like sexual undertones in Gundam, and like Gundam is pretty well known for having like explicit sexual undertones in a lot of
especially
series.
when Tomino's at the helm.
Exactly. But then in this series, it's like, again, they're all students. And like, I appreciated that they chose not to sexualize any characters. Like, I thought it was pretty cool. I'm not against, like, again, I'm not a sex negative person, so I'm not saying that like it's inherently better because of that. But it's like, again, they're all underage characters. Let's not focus on that. But at the same time, what that allows you to do then is like point out that like in all relationships, heterosexual or not, homosexual or not, wherever you are on the spectrum of it all, right, is like relationships are about emotions, emotionality, communication, how people's personal lives and life stories intersect and intermingle with one another. And in the case of this series, you have this immense conflict between Suletta and Murene, where they both have to like critically examine who they are as people, come to terms with the fact that they're not who they expected themselves to be, that whatever sense they had for themselves has to be re-examined, that the way they relate to one another has to be re-examined, and they reconcile at the end of it. That's kind of what all human connection's about. It's very gay that it happened in the way that it did. That's just what I'm gonna say. It's like, I'm sorry that it happened in a very gay way, so you can't erase that. But also,
silly.
At the same time, it's like, yeah, there's more to being gay than just gay sex, and that's like what I hate about like I'm sorry to rant, but it's like everyone fixates on gay intercourse to the point that they forget that like there's so much more going on than just that.
Well, and I think that's always been kind of the way to like make it, seem more deviant, right? Is kind of fixating on that. And I kind of appreciated the innocence of this, right? Because it really wasn't, I mean, like other than like, kind of a joke about, when Minarine called Suletta sex crazed early on, like, there's not like, nothing felt particularly sexual from like any of the relationships in this show, like straight or gay. Like none of them felt like particularly sexual in nature. They all seem to be kind of coming from a place of primarily, emotional connection, whether that be through some type of empathy or just through, the bond that had been, had grown between two characters and stuff like that.
Yeah, I thought it was decent. They really could have done a bit more with some of it, but as far like I can't really think of in particular anything in anime that has
Yeah.
handled LGBTQs better. Like everything else is like more weird or more closeted or more fucked up or something.
Mhm.
There was some stuff I was
Um,
seeing like clips circulate of in the wake of this controversy where it was like this very like ironic and making fun of it, where it was just like the girls in it were like sleeping together like in the same bed, and where they're like, oh hey, roommate, wink wink type stuff, where it was just like very much like just coded as like kind of like an fu to like, you know, their higher ups or whatever. But yeah, in general, like I was gonna say, like, and I haven't seen that show firsthand, just some clips here
um,
and there. But
and I
like
don't
I
want to
don't know what it is.
completely discount. I know that there's a little bit of like explicitly queer anime that I've never seen. But
Sure.
there's very little.
Yeah, and especially in the mainstream, there's just, you know.
Yeah. And homosexuality is still dicey in Japan.
Hmm.
Mhm.
So I think you can't be like, I forgive everything about the treatment because of the context, but I think putting it in the context of the culture was like, well, it's pretty progressive considering what a lot of the media coming out of Japan is like. And it wasn't perfect, but it was decent. It was decent in terms of the handling, and it sucks that we're in this dumb situation now where folks want to be upset about it. And it's even more frustrating because it's not all that explicit. Like I think like
Hmm.
it could have and should have been a tiny bit more explicit. I why didn't we get to see their wedding?
Right, right.
Like, come on, like, or at least like a photo of it. Show us like one of them looking through the photo album of the wedding. We don't even have to see them kiss. Like, I just want to see them hold hands and walk down the aisle in a photograph in a scrapbook, and I would be, a little bit more satisfied. Um, it felt like they just kind of didn't really go as far as they should have, basically. Is really all I can sum up. And then, like I say, then to have a controversy arise out of this ending is even more frustrating when it's like they
Yeah.
really didn't go that far in terms of like they could have been way more explicit. They could have been way more queer about it. I don't know. That's just like that's always the problem, right? Whenever you like give any ground in terms of like, like them kind of trying to give it like a slightly vague ending is like, even if you give any ground, like the people who hate you are gonna just come be mad anyway.
Right.
So you shouldn't give any ground. We should have seen Suleta and Miorian get married. Don't know what to say.
I agree with that assessment, and it's like the thing is like where Gundam shines aside from Cool Robot is also like it fundamentally is a tale about like um human beings and how they relate to one another. I guess you can say that about anything, haha, but it's like like Tomino says that as much. A lot of the Gundam creators, like when they speak about their work, they speak about it in that sense. And like, Tomino, to his credit, even is like, yeah, Char and Amuro, I wrote them to look gay. What did you want? And
Yeah.
and it's like, again, like when they started with new types as the gimmick back in the day of like people with these like pseudo like psychic abilities reaching across space to like connect with one another, right? Like in this deep lonely sense that like comes with living in space, right? It understands something about the human condition that sets it apart from like other anime and sci-fi fare, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this series, to its credit as well, like wrote its like interpersonal drama very, very well, and all the characters grow because of how they relate to one another and like their actions in those processes, right? So to erase the fig leaf of gayness that was in this series with like a catch-all term. I get it. They have to, do CYA in an environment like that. I get it, but you hate to see it, folks. You hate to see it.
Yeah. Frustrating.
So we'll probably get to our final discussion points, and we can probably wrap this up then. So, war, trauma, and hardship. These are essential themes in Gundam, and generally in past series, we've seen protagonists endure these as active combatants. This time, we're seeing them as essentially civilians. I don't even think a war is ever fully declared at any point in the series. So, does this setup change anything for this series?
I think it helps kind of contrast it, and not only like the civilian thing. A lot of the series kind of play with the idea that like these are sort of civilian soldiers, right? They're sort of forced to take up arms in conflict,
Right.
whereas in this one, like really, like Suletta never becomes like a soldier, right? I mean, do we necessarily even consider like her going into the Caliburn as becoming a combatant either, right? I mean, it's
If anything, she's almost on like an opposite trajectory of a lot of Gundam protagonists.
yeah, and I mean, and,
Where
like
it's like they're like reluctantly getting into Gundam and they're upset about it at first. She comes in here like, I love the Gundam. The Gundam rules.
the
Yeah.
Gundam is my family, literally and figuratively.
Family.
And then later, it's like later on, she's like, I don't want to be a soldier anymore. I've never been anything but a soldier my whole life so far. What's going on? It's like kind of a opposite. Like, I like that that's kind of an opposite storytelling, and I think that provides an insight into some different kinds of views, right? Because it's like a lot of times it's like it's sort of the how do you go from being a civilian to needing to do something like this. And in the case of a lot of Gundam series, like it feels very necessary when these folks take up arms, right? Like uh when he gets in the Gundam and Unicorn, it's like he's gonna die if he doesn't pilot that Gundam.
Yeah, and when I think what was cool here is that like, we still have some of the like civilian to soldier transitions, like with like Ghoul, right? I mean, kind of
Right.
and I think it's interesting, right? Because it's what made him stand out so much, right? Is that like he went on that journey, but like very few other characters did, right? He's the one who actually goes into 3 different active combat zones of people trying to kill him. For one reason or another, and that's different because it's like all the other students don't really get that. I mean, they get to experience like kind of the victimhood of the Rumble Ring, and then later Noria's little dilemma. But I think that was what kind of helped too, is that you have like this more you get like more variety in that perspective. As well, compared to the other series where it's kind of like they're all in the original series, like they're all kind of thrown into the same situation, and they cope with it a little differently.
Yeah,
a much more homogenized experience.
I liked that there was some look into the like, well, what does it mean to have been a soldier for a long time, and then you're trying to deprogram from that we got with Suletta, because that was kind of unique. To Gundam. I can't think of anything else in Gundam that quite parallels that. Maybe a few things that have mild similarities, but for the most part, like a couple characters in Wing that kind of go through some transitions, but for the most part, like there's not much in Gundam that really parallels that, where it's like Suletta's really been a soldier from birth. and she's not a reluctant soldier when we meet her. She's an eager soldier. Like, she's fully indoctrinated and ready to do whatever it takes.
Yeah.
And then it's like, she's like, wait, maybe I don't want that anymore. How do I get out of that? And I think that, like I said, it's just like that question of how do we deprogram people from violence? If we hope to move towards a more peaceful society, we're going to have to think about that a lot. Because there's all these people in our society that are trained for violence right now. And we've got to untrain them from that way of thinking. So I definitely thought that was like a uniquely explored theme here that was different.
I think that's spot on. Very good points, everyone. I think, yeah, I had one final point, but we basically covered this in like some of our earlier discussion. So that pretty much covers everything I had planned in our outline. Any other thoughts from anyone?
I mean, I'll just say it's a great series. Really, I think this is a great entry point for somebody who's never watched a Gundam before, wants to give it a shot. There's a lot to like for a lot of different people. And I really it makes me excited for the future of Gundam because there's been so much Gundam already, and you kind of think at a certain point, like, how much room do they have to run? This series made me feel like there's still plenty of room for Gundam to go for many more decades of storytelling.
Yeah, 100%. I think that yeah, I mean this is it's definitely, I think it's up there, top 10, probably top 5 best series for me. You know, I really enjoyed this one, and I think it's a really strong entry into the franchise. It's a good entry to start with, and I think, you know, Gundam was in kind of like a weird place, you know, and more recently, like IBO, I didn't really care for it much. From what I understand, especially in Japan, that series was like really controversial, and like it was. Speaking of like needing a new audience with this series, apparently I read that there were some episodes that weren't viewed by anyone under the age of 20, which is like kind of wild for like what we sort of nominally see as like, you know, at least kid adjacent space, right? But you know, I think I'm really curious to see where they go with this. And you know, I think it's definitely like good to see kind of like the sort of AU Gundams go in like I think a more positive direction than I think where they had been in the past few entries.
Totally agree. And I'm glad also, I just want to say really quickly that you mentioned that this is like a top 5 Gundam. It's definitely, I think this might even be like my number 2. It didn't dethrone Unicorn.
Okay.
But I think that, you know, it's worth noting, it's like it's a great entry point, but this is also a great series if you've seen a lot of Gundam.
Yeah.
It does a lot of things that are meant to please the viewer who is also a longtime fan. And I also think that's worth noting.
I will admit, though, the one thing, and like, it didn't bother me, and I don't think it bothered any of us. If you're like going into Gundam because you really like mechas and you want to see a lot of mecha action, this might not be the series for you. It was definitely far more character driven than it was driven by mobile suit combat. I know there was a lot of memes about Choo Choo's Demi Trainer, or not Demi Trainer, the Demi Barding, and its lack of doing really anything. And you know, if that's something that I mean, in my opinion, that's a little bit more shallow. But if that's something that really, you know, bothers you, then, you know, there might be a better point of entry into the franchise. But I would still recommend this show. I think there's still some really good action when it's there. It's just not, you know, nearly as much of a focal point.
Yeah, the joke I have with my partner about Gundam is like, it's usually like 70% interpersonal drama and then 30% big robot fight.
Yeah.
I think this one might have been
Oh, he
closer to
flips
like
around.
20. You know?
Yeah.
Like,
20,
it was-
maybe 10. It's for the second season. The second season felt like it was a bit
there's still a
lighter.
few good robot fights, but
Yeah.
it's not. It's
I
there's
mean,
a
Ghoul vs.
lot of
Shadik,
people
I think more
talking.
than makes up for the lack of them. I think that fight was definitely a major highlight in the second season.
Ghoul versus Shadik literally gave me Amuro versus Char in the final battle of DCA. It gave me that vibe.
A bit, yeah.
It's a good vibe.
Yeah, like definitely not in the sense of like we're trying to stop this asteroid from hitting Earth, but in the sense of like, we are inexorably trauma bonded from our time together, and like there's no other way for this to shake out other than like one of us wins.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think like, this is probably a top 5 series. I wish it was longer, but to its credit, it didn't overstay its welcome, and I guess that's
Yep.
something to be appreciated these days. And I think like its ease of entry for people who are like, well, I'd like to watch Gundam, but I don't know where to start.
Yeah.
Or it's like I would just like to add some new anime to the rotation. Perfect for that. I'd also say if you're not the biggest fan of anime for certain tropes, it's pretty trope-averse, I'd say. So you could probably put this in your rotation if you're not an anime fan, I'd reckon. All in all, though, I think this was a pretty good discussion on this series.
Yeah.
Maybe it comes back for some kind of sequel movie or side story. Let's see what happens. But
I'd almost like to see more of just the maybe some of the side characters explored more. Like I'm content with where Mirain and Suletta left off, and
for sure.
It's let them have their happy ending. We don't need to ruin their lives or anything like that to create a sequel. But it's to create the appropriate drama for a sequel. But I think that there's probably some characters that you could follow through on them, or just follow new characters too, right? I mean, that's kind of the route Zeta went way back when, and obviously it continued the story of some.
Yeah, I'd be perfectly happy for a brand new show in Ad Astra where we see Suletta and Miorin holding hands at a cafe, for one moment or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, let's do a double Zeta and not a C Destiny.
In an ambiguously gay kind of way. But
yeah, in an ambiguous, they might just be friends.
Yeah.
And they were friends.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a couple of characters that you feel like a sense they could maybe, especially I think if they did something that spun off some of the Earth House crew a few years later, that's kind of an easy layup. There's some easy wins like that just sitting there. So I wouldn't be surprised if they go for it. The question is, when will it come out? Will it be 10 years from now?
Yeah, that's the mystery to it, isn't it?
That's the fun thing about media these days is is this revival going to come back amid the climate crisis? Let's find out.
We'll see, I guess.
Oh gosh.
Something to watch as the ocean boils.
Try not to let that one get to me. Well, it was a blast discussing this with both of you. Kennedy, you're not on Twitter anymore, so where can people find you?
Well, if you're on Bluesky, I'm on there. kennedytcooper at blah 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 whatever.
Yeah, I'll put the link in the description as well.
I'm on Instagram, but I don't always post there a lot. But I don't know, maybe if more people followed me there, I might be a little more motivated to post there more than once a week. I don't know. Doesn't matter. You don't need to follow me. Fine.
Don't follow. See what happens.
Yeah.
You'll miss out on banger skeets. Now we're calling them skeets instead of tweets. God.
I thought they were. I thought they were just posts on there because, like, I know there was like the whole thing where he's like, "Oh, you know, it's an you can say that like you know it's an X post or whatever," but it's like all the vernacular that he wants to use for the site, all like is completely devoid of meaning. Where he's like, "Oh, I liked the post from my ex girlfriend," and it's like, well, one, if you have even if you had like a Twitter girlfriend, that's pretty pathetic. Versus you know a real one. But I don't know. This is I'm still on Twitter. I guess you know that's my thing. I mean my stuff's on there. I'll probably try to make the jump to Bluesky. I can't. Given that you know part of my dissertation it uses Twitter data, I can't really just like forsake the website entirely. I guess until it you know finally goes up in a ball of flames. But there's that. I don't really use my Instagram. It's just cats. So, you know, if you're into that, I guess, you know, you can follow me there too. But
we'll see about plugging Instagram. I was thinking about do we make an Instagram for the podcast page with Twitter's collapse going on, but we'll have to think that over. We did get the podcast on Bluesky though, so I will include that link as well. Follow us there. And we will be on Twitter until it explodes. It's very weird doing plugs, not knowing if your social media website's going to stay up or not. So just stay tuned. That's all I can say. And then I'll have the links for all our sites that aren't going downhill in our description as well.
A link to all the websites that didn't pay a guy $2,000 for posting child sexual exploitation material.
Dear God.
And please donate to the show so Adi can finally afford to pay for the blue check mark. Joking, of course.
No, this is a free show. In fact, we should be paying our listeners for putting up with us.
Yeah, that was a joke.
Let's not say that. Let's not say that because then someone's gonna really ask. Let's not. Well, thanks again for tuning in, dear listeners. I'll have all of our links in the description. And thanks again to Kennedy and Josh for coming through for this one once again. Yeah. So,
always a pleasure.
Till next time, dear listener, take care.